Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 7th July 2018. Now let us begin.
Now we have taken this article from page 8. Now what this article talks about is the recent hike in the minimum support prices for the Kharif crop. Now before understanding this article, what we'll do first is understand on how did the government of India fix MSP prices earlier. After that, we'll try to understand as to what have been the recent changes, and then finally understand on how production costs are being calculated under the new changes. And it is after understanding all these three aspects that you will get a better understanding as to what this article talks about. So now let us begin with the first aspect. Now what recently has happened is the central government of India has announced a hike in the minimum support price for most of the crops that are planted in the Kharif season. And this hike in the minimum support price is based on a new formula, under which farmers would now be paid 1.5 times their estimated production cost. Now what used to earlier happen is, the Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices, which is under the Ministry of Agriculture, used to recommend minimum support prices for crops. And the CACP would consider various factors while recommending the minimum support price for a particular commodity or a crop, wherein under the various factors, it would include to the cost of cultivation of that commodity or crop for the farmer, the supply and demand situation for that commodity. The third factor would be the prices in the global and the domestic market. The fourth factor would be on how MSP for one commodity or crop is relative to another crop, so as not to create a mismatch between the various MSPs that are given for various crops, and ensuring a fair price for different farmers who have planted different crops. The fifth factor would be on how the minimum support price would impact the consumers, as to whether a higher MSP would cause a rise in prices for the consumers. The sixth factor would be of environmental factors such as soil and water use, wherein the Government of India tries to regulate the MSPs that it gives for crops that have a higher water usage. The seventh factor would be the terms of trade between the agriculture and the non-agriculture sector. So let's say for example, the non-agriculture sector produces various industrial goods such as tractors among other for the agriculture sector. Now a higher MSP price for particular farmers or particular crops may lead to a higher agricultural growth and thereby increasing the demand for such non-agricultural goods. But however, the usage of such industrial goods in the agriculture sector further leads to an increase in the prices of agricultural goods that end up affecting the consumer. And therefore the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices looks into the terms of trade on how the agriculture sector and the non-agriculture sector affect the prices of each other. So now hopefully you understood the various factors that were used by the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices to recommend MSP prices for crops. Now let us understand as to what has been the new change. So now what has happened is that in the budget for 2018-19, the Government of India announced that the MSP prices would henceforth be fixed at 1.5 times of the production cost. And this fixation of the MSP prices at 1.5 times is now a predetermined principle. So now what has happened is that the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices will now primarily only estimate the production cost and then recommend the minimum support price by applying the 1.5 times formula. So let's say for example, the production cost for paddy has been projected at roughly around Rs 1100 per quintal. And now what the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices would do is take 1.5 times of Rs 1100 and round it off for an MSP of Rs 1750 per quintal. So now hopefully you understand as to what used to happen earlier, wherein the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices would fix the MSP prices based on various factors. But now the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices would now only recommend the MSP by applying the 1.5 times formula based on the production cost. So now hopefully you've understood as to what used to happen earlier and what has changed now. Now apart from this, another aspect that you should understand as to how the production cost is calculated. Now how this production cost is calculated is seen in the Price Policy for Kharif Crops report of the Commission of Agriculture Cost and Prices. And under this report, it has stated that the MSP recommendation is based on 1.5 times on the A2 plus FL cost. Now here A2 covers all the paid out costs directly incurred by the farmer, and this cost includes both in cash and in kind, wherein it includes the cost on seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, hired labor, leased in land, fuel, irrigation, among other costs that is incurred by the farmer, either in cash or in kind. While A2 plus FL includes A2, what we have just explained, plus the value of the unpaid family labor. So it includes a specified number of people in the family of that farmer who have been working in that agricultural field, who have been working for that agricultural production. So the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices will now recommend the MSP for particular crops by applying a 1.5 time formula based on the production cost. And this production cost would be calculated by using the formula A2 plus FL, wherein A2 would cover all the paid out costs directly incurred by the farmer either in cash or kind, and FL would include the value of the unpaid family labor. Now the question is on how this A2 plus FL cost be calculated. Now the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices does not do any form of field-based cost estimates itself to calculate the A2 plus FL cost. So what the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices does is that it makes projections using state-wise and crop-specific production cost estimates. And this data is provided by the Directorate of Economics and Statistics in the Agricultural Ministry. But there is a problem with these statistics is that there is a 3-year lag to calculate this data. So therefore for the current year of 2018-19, the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices would be using the state-wise cost estimates from the 2013-14 to the 2015-16 data. So therefore the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices does not have real-time data to calculate the A2 plus FL cost. So therefore the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices, to make its estimate relevant in the current scenario, uses latest price data from other sources, such as the data on wages from the Labor Bureau, the wholesale prices from the Office of Economic Advisor, and other latest data that can have an impact in the input cost when calculating A2 plus FL. So now hopefully you've also understood that the Commission on Agriculture Cost and Prices does not have any field-based data to estimate the cost that would make up the A2 plus FL system. So therefore it uses the production cost estimates of the Directorate of Economics and Statistics in the Agriculture Ministry, the wages data from the Labor Bureau, the wholesale prices data from the Office of the Economic Advisor, among other forms of input data, to estimate the cost that would form under the A2 plus FL formula, which would then form the production cost upon which 1.5 times would be provided for MSP. Now hopefully you have understood on how the MSP prices would be calculated under the new formula. Now let us understand as to what the article talks about. Now hopefully you have understood the 3 aspects on how Government of India used to fix minimum support prices earlier. You've also understood as to what have been the recent changes. And moreover, you also understand on how the production costs are being calculated under the new changes. Now let us understand as to what this article talks about. Now according to this article, the MSP hike would not benefit all farmers. And within that context, the article has given various recommendations, wherein the first recommendation is for the Government of India to focus on reforms of the agricultural sector. The second recommendation is to implement a cap funding mechanism, wherein under this cap funding mechanism, the difference between MSP and the market price is transferred to the farmers by the Government of India. The third and the final recommendation is to ease stock holding limits under the Essential Commodities Act, and thereby allowing farm exports. Now hopefully up till here you've understood the 3 recommendations that have been given in this article to ensure a solution for farmer distress, wherein the first recommendation is for the Government of India to focus on reforms of the agriculture sector. The second recommendation is to implement the gap funding mechanism, wherein the Government of India would transfer the difference between MSP and market prices to the farmers. And the third and the final recommendation is to ease stock holding limits under the Essential Commodities Act. And by easing the stock holding limit, it would allow an increase in the farm exports. Now with regards to UPSC syllabus, this article and the explanation given in this section with regards to on how MSP would be calculated would be placed in GS paper 3 within the section Economic Development, and more specifically issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support prices. So a question for practice, wherein the question simply asks, analyze the steps taken by the Union government to reduce farmer distress, wherein one of the steps would be the hike in MSP. And when analyzing this point of the hike in MSP, you can refer to on how the MSP would be given 1.5 times the production cost, wherein the production cost would be based on the A2 plus FL formula. And moreover, you can also refer to the points that have been raised in this article that this MSP hike would not benefit all farmers, thereby giving it a complete analysis of this particular step. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now what this article talks about is the Government of India is considering a proposal in creating a centralized pool of documentary evidence that can be shared between various investigative agencies. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand the features of this central pool, and then understand what are the issues with this central pool, and then finally what would be the proposed benefits of forming this central pool of documentary proofs. Now the important features of this centralized pool of documentary evidence would first be that such a central database will help in the quick sharing of actionable information on economic offences between the various central investigative agencies. The second main feature of this proposal would that it would help in overcoming the existing procedural and legal hurdles in sharing of evidences between different investigative agencies. And the third and the final feature of this proposal is that such proof that have been gathered by respective agencies would be stored at one place, and its copies shall be made available for the purpose of investigations, which then can be used as evidence in the court of law. Now hopefully you have understood the three features of the centralized pool of documentary evidence. Now the main issue with this centralized pool of documentary evidence is that such a process of collective evidence collection and the storage of this evidence would require necessary amendments to the legislations governing different investigative agencies. Now the centralized pool of documentary evidence has possible benefits, wherein it would increase the interagency cooperation on different economic offences, and this combined effort between different agencies will improve the efficiency of solving the economic related offences. And moreover, such a centralized pool of documentary evidence will reduce the unnecessary procedural delays that occur in gathering evidence from different investigative agencies. Now hopefully up till here you've understood the basic features of this centralized pool of documentary evidence. You've also understood the issues and the benefits related to the centralized pool of documentary evidence. Now you have to understand that this centralized pool of documentary evidence is currently a proposal, and therefore this news is currently in transition. But if you look at the syllabus of the Civil Services examination, wherein the centralized pool of documentary evidences would be placed in GS paper 3 within the section Security, and more specifically in the subsection Money Laundering and its Prevention, wherein if a question is asked to provide suggestions on preventing money laundering, you can refer to the central pool of documentary evidences, wherein it could lead to quicker investigation and thereby prevent money laundering. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 13. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is understand the various terms that have been used in this article from the perspective of prelims examination. When the terms we will try to understand is first import cover. The second term is short-term dip to foreign exchange reserve. The third term we'll try to understand is the components of India's Forex reserves. And the fourth and the last term we'll try to understand is the Bank for International Settlement, or BIS. And the understanding of these terms would be from the perspective of your prelims examination. So now let us start with the first term, import cover. Now import cover is an indicator of the stability of a currency of a country, wherein import cover measures the number of months in which the imports to a country can be covered with the available foreign exchange reserves that are there with the central bank of that country. So now let's say the import bill of country A is of $100, and this country A has $700 in its Forex reserves, which means that country A would be able to cover its import bill for 7 months. And this 7 months is then therefore known as the import cover, where an import cover measures the number of months that the foreign exchange reserves available with the central bank of a country can cover that country's imports. And it is typically seen that 10 months of import cover is required to maintain stability of the currency. Now hopefully you've understood as to what is meant by import cover. Now let us understand the components that form a country's forex reserves, wherein the components of India's forex reserves include foreign currency assets such as the money that is kept with the central bank or the Reserve Bank of India in form of the US dollars, the euro, and other major currencies. The second component is gold reserves. The third component is the special drawing rights of the International Monetary Fund. And the fourth main component of India's Forex reserves is RBI's reserve position with the International Monetary Fund. Now, the foreign currency assets constitute the largest component of India's Forex reserves. Now, short-term debt to foreign exchange reserves means all debt that the country has which have an original maturity of 1 year or less. Now, the fourth and the final term that we'll try to understand is the Bank of International Settlement. Now, this Bank of International Settlement was established in 1930 and is owned by 60 central banks from around the world. And the head office of the Bank of International Settlement is based in Basel, Switzerland. Now, the main mission of the Bank of International Settlement is to serve central banks across the world in their pursuit of monetary and financial stability, to foster international cooperation in the field of monetary and financial stability, and to act as a bank of the central banks. Now, you should also understand this unique feature wherein the Bank of International Settlement does not accept deposits and also does not provide any form of financial services to private individuals or corporate entities. Now, hopefully up till here you've understood as to what is import cover, and moreover you also understand as to what are the components of India's forex reserves. You also understand as to what is meant by short-term debt, and lastly you also understand the features of the Bank of International Settlement. Now, questions have been asked in your prelims examination that are focused on the understanding of static terms of economics, wherein the first question was asked in the prelims of 2014, which had asked as to what does venture capital mean, while the second question was asked in the prelims of 2016, which had asked as to what does the term import cover mean. And in similar format, when static economic terms are referenced in the newspaper, magazine, or in any other format that you read that are mentioned in the news, you should get a basic understanding as to what does that term mean, wherein questions on static economic terms are asked in the prelims examination. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 7. Now, what this article talks about is that the central government has deployed IAS officers to ensure the ground implementation of the various flagship social welfare schemes of the Government of India in the aspirational districts. Now, what we'll do with regards to this article is understand as to what is the Aspirational Districts program. Now, the core strategy under the Aspirational Districts program has been first of convergence of central and state schemes. The second is collaboration of central, state Prabhari officers and district collectors. The third core strategy of the ADP program is competition among districts driven by mass movement. And the fourth and the last core strategy of the Aspirational Districts program is to measure the progress done by the districts and then rank the given districts. So therefore, under this program, there would be a convergence of central and state government schemes with regards to various areas of focus within a given district. And this collaboration of central and state schemes would be driven by the central officers, state Prabhari officers, and the district collectors. And therefore, there would be a convergence of central and state officers. And moreover, the assumption is that the competition among districts to improve themselves on a given set of parameters would be driven by the mass movement led by the central and state officers, the civil society, corporates, and the residents of that district. And lastly, this progress on various parameters would be measured in a given methodology, and subsequently, a ranking would be given to each district. Now, the core areas of focus would be health and nutrition, agriculture and water resources, financial inclusion, education, skill development, and basic infrastructure. Now, hopefully up till here, you've also understood the core areas of focus of the Aspirational Districts program, wherein the first one would be health and nutrition, the second would be agriculture and water resources, the third being financial inclusion, the fourth is education, and the fifth is skill development and basic infrastructure. And it is based upon these core areas of focus that various parameters have been formed, and it is on those parameters that the progress of each district would be measured and subsequently ranked upon. And it is schemes within these core areas of focus of either the central or the state government that would be converged upon, and it is within these core areas of focus that there would be a collaboration of the central and state officers. Now, the various features of the Aspirational Districts program, wherein the first one is that it would focus on strength of each district and then identify areas of immediate improvement. The second feature is that there would be real-time ranking from May 2018 onwards. The third feature is that there would be no separate financial package or allocation of funds. The fourth feature is that the scheme would focus on spending better rather than spending more. The fifth feature is that corporate social responsibility from corporates would act as a force multiplier in the Aspirational Districts program. And the sixth and the last feature of the Aspirational Districts program is that it would focus on both cooperative and competitive federalism. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood the basic features of the Aspirational Districts program, wherein it would focus on strength of each district and then identify areas of immediate improvement, wherein a district which may have strong indicators in financial inclusion, then the focus within that district would shift to financial inclusion and thereby making it one of the best within its field. Moreover, there would be real-time ranking among the districts from May 2018 onwards. Apart from this, there would be no separate financial package or allocation of funds from the central government for this program, because the focus would be to spend better in the form of already available central and state government schemes rather than spending more through financial packages or allocation of funds. Additionally, the Corporate Social Responsibility Fund from corporates would act as a force multiplier in the Aspirational Districts program. And lastly, this program would focus both on cooperative and competitive federalism, wherein competitive federalism would come through the ranking framework which has been envisioned in this program. And in terms of cooperative federalism, it would come through when each district tries to find out on how the other district has improved in any of the parameters within the core areas of focus, and then try to implement or mimic with suitable changes for its own district. So hopefully up till here you've understood the core strategy of the Aspiration Districts program, its core area of focus, its basic features, and each of these sections therefore become important with regards to your prelims and mains examination on a question on the Aspiration Districts program. And now with this we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now there are two basic facts that you need to understand from this article. Is that switching to alternate cereals such as maize, millet, and sorghum from the current farming of rice and wheat, then firstly, it can reduce the demand for irrigation water, and secondly, improve the nutritional availability to the consumers. Now hopefully you have understood the focus of the article, wherein it cites a research which has said that if the Indian farmers switch from the current farming of rice and wheat to alternate cereals such as maize, millets and sorghum, it can firstly reduce the demand for irrigation water, and secondly, it would also improve the nutritional availability to the consumers. Now these are the two facts that you need to remember from this article. So wherein if a question is asked on how to reduce the demand for irrigation water in Indian farming, or if a question is asked as to what steps can be taken to improve the nutritional availability to Indian consumers, and in both of these questions, you can answer by stating the fact that switching to alternate cereals such as maize, millet and sorghum from the current farming of wheat and rice would first reduce the demand for irrigation water and secondly improve the nutritional availability to Indian consumers. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 10. Now with regards to this article, we will not go into what Justice A.K. Goyal has said in his farewell speech. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is understand the March 20th verdict of the Supreme Court on the SCST Act. Now this March 20th verdict of the Supreme Court on the SCST Act was covered in the DNS of 21st March. So what we'll do is try to revise as to what the Supreme Court had said on the SCST Act in its verdict on 20th March. Now the Supreme Court has issued guidelines to protect public servants and private employees from arbitrary arrest under the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Act of 1989. The Supreme Court further stated that a preliminary inquiry must be conducted before registering an FIR, and this preliminary inquiry would check whether the case falls within the parameters of the Atrocities Act and whether the case is frivolous or motivated. And therefore, according to the Supreme Court, the public servants can only be arrested after written permission of their appointing authority. And in the case of private employees, such demand must be allowed by the Senior Superintendent of Police or the SSP. Now, hopefully, up till here, you have understood that the Supreme Court has issued guidelines to protect public servants and private employees from arbitrary arrest under the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989, wherein, under these guidelines, a preliminary inquiry would be held before a FIR is filed under this Act, and this inquiry would check the purview whether this complaint is under this Act or not, and whether the complaint is not motivated or frivolous. And moreover, a public servant can be arrested under this Act after a written permission of the appointing authority. And similarly, a private employee can be arrested under this Act after it is allowed by this SSP. Now let us understand why the Supreme Court has issued these guidelines. Now the Supreme Court had observed that in the past 3 decades there have been several instances of false complaints under the SCST Atrocities Act of 1989, and therefore the Act has been regularly misused to file false complaints. And because of these false complaints, the Act is being used as an instrument of blackmail and for harassment of innocent citizens, and therefore to protect public administration, which includes public servants, were threatened on the pretext of this Act, and therefore found it difficult to give adverse remarks for the fear of being charged under this Act. Now the reason this Act can be used to file false complaints and to threaten public servant because it denied anticipatory bail to the suspected offenders. Now anticipatory bail has been defined under the Code of Criminal Procedure, wherein any person has reason to believe that he or may be arrested on an accusation of having committed a non-bailable offence. He or she may apply to the High Court or the Court of Session for grant of bail in advance. And apart from this, accusation under this Act would lead to a loss of face value and image of the accused public servant. Now hopefully you have also understood why these guidelines were issued by the Supreme Court, that this Act was used to file false complaints and to threaten public servants, since accusation under this Act would deny anticipatory bail and would also lead to loss of face value for the accused public servant.
And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.